Hi, my name's Laura Coulthard and I work for County Durham CCG. And together with the Young Persons Advocacy Group in County Durham, we've co-produced the Language Project, which aims to start conversations about preferred terms to describe autism. In this presentation, I will talk through how the project began, what we did, and what we would like to do next. And thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. And feel free to get in contact if you have any questions. So, the language to describe autism has been debated for a long time. Back in 2010, NICE, which stands for the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, published guidance on autism and made particular reference to the fact that many different terms were used. This guidance opted for the term autistic and autism rather than autistic spectrum disorder or the acronym ASD. This was endorsed by Autistica and the National Autism Society, who actively advised against using the terms ASD or autistic spectrum disorder. In fact, in 2015, this was further supported by research where 3,470 people were asked what terms they preferred to describe autism. Now, of whom 502 respondents were autistic, and it was no surprise that autism was the most preferred term. However, despite this, the terms autistic spectrum disorder and the acronym ASD are very commonly used in everyday conversations, clinical and educational reports, everyday kind of parlance, on social media, at conferences, and in research. So we decided to ask around locally to see what people thought about the terms used to describe autism. So first of all, we asked young members of the Extreme Group, and that's a children's rights organisation for young people up to the age of 25 in County Durham. Now, they said that they did not like being called disordered and voted on the terms autistic or autism. I then attended a parent-carer conference in County Durham, and our parent-carer forum is called Making Changes Together, and they once again preferred the term autism. However, I also asked them how much they liked or disliked particular terms, and again they definitely liked the term autistic and did not like the term ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. Interestingly, we then asked NHS practitioners who had a much more mixed response, and a number of practitioners preferred to use the term ASD or autistic spectrum disorder because it was considered the formal diagnostic term and didn't really want to change. So following this, and because there were differences of opinion, we decided to widen the consultation, and myself and some members from the Extreme Group co-produced another survey. We wanted this to be quick and easy to complete, and we asked just a few simple questions, such as what do you think about the following terms from do not like to like very much, and we just asked about the most commonly used terms. Then we asked which term they preferred most, and we also gave people the option to have other, and we asked if there were any other terms they used to describe autism. So when we circulated this survey, according to the survey platform, this took less than 3 minutes to complete. And we asked parent-carer forums locally and nationally, local parent-carer support groups, autism groups, UK social media sites with links to autism, neurodiversity, and we also asked colleagues in County Durham. Within a month, we had 573 responses, of whom 106 were autistic adults, 9 were autistic young people. And people could categorise themselves as an autistic parent of an autistic child. But when we were doing the statistics, we grouped people into autistic and non-autistic groups. So, what were the results? Okay, So really, probably unexpectedly, people preferred the term autistic the most. However, autistic people liked it significantly more than those who did not describe themselves as autistic. Perhaps unsurprisingly, people disliked ASD the most, but autistic respondents again disliked it significantly more than those people who did not describe themselves as autistic. And again, following from the other research, the preferred term overall was autistic, and it followed the same pattern. Everybody preferred it, but autistic respondents preferred it significantly more than everyone else. So we did some statistics on the results, and I feel that this is a very powerful slide because it looks specifically at how much the different terms are liked or disliked according to whether the respondent is autistic or not autistic. And as you can see, 3 is kind of the neutral zone. You can see here that respondents who are not autistic are kind of clustered around this middle area. And although they like autistic the most, as represented by the green triangle, and they dislike ASD the most, which is represented by the red triangle, they don't have particularly strong opinions about this. However, the autistic group did have very strong opinions. And as you can see here, the distance between the red triangle, which represents ASD, and the green triangle, which represents autism, is very far apart. And it's not surprising that those who directly and personally experience autism and or have received a diagnosis have stronger opinions about the terms that should be used. And in the next slide, I'll explain a little bit about the statistics. So as you can see here, within the autistic group, the difference between how much they like the term autistic, and they dislike the term ASD is classed as extremely significant. And that means if the same survey was repeated 10,000 times, you would expect to see the same result on all but one occasion. One way of representing this statistic is by trying to show 10,000 dots on a page, and this arrow there represents the one dot which would have or find a different opinion.
What does this mean? This means that if we were to repeat the survey 10,000 times, we would get the same result on all but one occasion. And 9,999 is a lot of surveys, as indicated by each individual piece of curly pasta.
So given there seems to be a difference in opinion, I wanted to talk a little bit about the wider context in which to consider some of the counter arguments. Language is very, very powerful, and disorder is a negative value judgment that has been externally given to the experience of autism or to those who have received the diagnosis. And it actually doesn't allow people to make up their own judgment or decision as to whether they feel it's a disorder or not. Also, calling autism a disorder implies that autism is a negative thing when something goes wrong in the brain. And the diagnostic criteria exclusively consists of a checklist of negative things. Disorder is an all-encompassing blanket term, and it certainly doesn't facilitate a positive narrative or conversations about what is good about being autistic. And in fact, some research shows that autism is linked to multiple strengths and advantages, and for this reason it should be considered a difference, not a disorder. I find that the late Desmond Tutu summarised this really well when he said, language does not just describe reality, language creates the reality it describes. Language is ever changing and it's dynamic. New words emerge and other words are made redundant. And in the same way, diagnostic terms such as imbecile, lunatics and moron were used to describe people who had poor mental health or suffered early trauma or who had a learning disability. We don't use these terms anymore as they're considered subjugating and disrespectful. And the same could be said of being described as disordered by virtue of having a different way of seeing the world. Now, what people might not be aware of is that most services use a diagnostic tool called the International Classification of Diseases, or ICD, to formally diagnose autism. Now, ICD-10 was used from 1994 until this very year, in January 2022. Now, in ICD-10, the formal diagnostic term was actually childhood autism, which actually is inappropriate and incorrect. Now, in the American diagnostic tool, that did use the terms autistic spectrum disorder. And now, of January 2022, just a few months ago, ICD-11 does similarly include the terms autistic spectrum disorder. However, there are diagnoses where there are formal diagnostic terms that have never been used. So, for example, in the UK, we have never used the term mental retardation, despite it being the official diagnostic term. We have always used the term learning disabilities and, more recently, intellectual disabilities. So, even when there are official diagnostic terms, they shouldn't necessarily be dogmatically accepted. And of course, our cultural understanding of beliefs evolves and changes over time. And homosexuality is a classic example of something that was considered to be a mental illness and that was to be treated. And it was only removed as a diagnosable mental illness in 1973 after many years of debate. And finally, I wanted to end with the NHS principle of nothing about me without me. And the NHS has a duty to listen and respond to what people are telling us. And they are saying this loud and clear. Do not use the term ASD, or autistic spectrum disorder. Just use the word autistic. So whilst the survey was open and afterwards, and when we've presented the results, we've received a lot of feedback from a range of people, and I will let you read these quotes yourself. There are two that I find really powerful that were actually from the young people from the extreme group. And this one, the first one, is on the top right. Autism isn't an alternative word, it is the right word. And the one on the middle left says, I think people should have more empathy. I think it should be compulsory to listen to this feedback.
We are all made different. Autism is just one of those differences between human beings. Yes, it may be more challenging in life for a person. It may put more barriers in the way. But that's it. It's a difference. Which is why we can't have any negative aspects of how we describe it, just as we can't for any other difference in human beings. It's important to me because I know some of my greatest unique attributes derive from me being on the spectrum, and I wouldn't be without them. And I'll stuff anyone who tries to put a negative tint on that, because I am great. Next, as I believe in everything else, education. Push forward, go forward with education about people on the spectrum. Make it as common as sliced bread and margarine and bubblegum in society. Make it so neurotypical people don't think twice when they hear someone has autism. That's what I think.
So, what do we want to do next? We've been very fortunate to get some funding for a video to let people know what the survey said. This is being made at the moment by a North East film company who also employ autistic adults. And this video is co-produced with young people from the Extreme Group. We also want to have a commitment to continue this discussion, and a member of the Extreme Group is going to present this project at a conference in Manchester in a few months. We would love people to change the language they use and stop using the terms ASD or autistic spectrum disorder, and even ASC. We want to encourage everybody to pass the message on that people just like autistic. Now, in no way do we want to minimise the difficulties that come from being autistic. It can be extremely hard being neuroatypical in a neurotypical world. I myself have a neuroatypical family, but many of the positives of being neurodiverse have been ignored, and we would like to develop a more balanced narrative around autism and the positives of having a neuroatypical way of viewing the world. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation.